Should you have any issues throughout the meeting, Haley is your best bet. But let's just kick it off here. Again, very excited to be reconvening this community advisory hui for the Climate Ready Oahu project. It's probably shocking to you all how long it's been since we last met, which was back in January. Rest assured, the project has continued, the work has been ongoing. There's been great opportunities to modify and bring more resources to the work, and we're happy to provide some of those updates here with you today. You're also probably wondering, the initial invitation said, actually, frankly, I don't remember what month it might have said your volunteer service as an advisory member would conclude. We're still within the anticipated number of meetings. We're only at meeting 4 of 5. And frankly, we're just so pleased and thrilled that you all received the information, responded, and are here today to continue to provide, frankly, some really essential feedback for us as, again, we got to different decision points and process points within the project. Also, even though the year had started sort of a dry, wet season, certainly I think we can all very much say lono ika makihiki, as we now have gotten into a much cooler, wetter season, and a really important time for us individually, collectively, government, professionals to sort of like reflect, assess, recharge as best as can so that we can dive back into the work. And really for this project, it's at one of those points too, where we're currently evaluating different decision points that we can make moving forward, different ways to structure and think about how we communicate the really wealth and dense information back out with and on behalf of the city, and in further co-creation with community, so that people can also see themselves within the opportunity for improving climate change adaptation processes moving forward. But the other thing that I'm most excited about is that I will, for the most part, moving forward, both on this meeting and in communications with you all, not be the one that is talking all the time. I'm very excited to introduce you to the new project manager and the new Coastal and Water Program Manager for the city's Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency, Alex Yee, who we will be handing off the meeting to shortly. As you all recall, I served in that position for the past several years, up until the end of last calendar year, before stepping into the director position with the new mayor, Mayor Blangiardi, and the new administration. So there certainly was a little bit of a pain point there as we were ensuring to have capacity to run this program and this project. So very excited that we were able to bring Alex back home to step into this position and to continue to engage with you all moving forward. So with that general update, the next agenda item before we get into the real content for today is just general acceptance of notes for meeting number 3. You may not remember exactly everything that we spoke about back in January, but generally, as these commission meetings serve mostly an advisory role, we're not necessarily looking for a full-on vote for the meeting minutes themselves. They certainly can be updated and edited should there be something specifically that you would like to address, and we can always amend those and update them on the website. Generally, how we have taken this agenda item in the past is, as long as there's no major concerns or dissension, looking for a general AO of acceptance of the meeting notes from January 2021. See some nods, double thumbs up from Chip, virtual and other physical thumbs up as well. Okay, thank you all for entertaining that. And as I said earlier, I'm very pleased to now turn over the meeting to Alex Yee.
Hello, Matt. Aloha kako. My name is Alex Yee. I am the Coastal and Water Program Manager now, following in Matt's footsteps, taking over this project. Very quick introduction about me. I grew up in Halawa and Manoa, went over to the continent for university, where I got my degree in urban planning, focusing on climate change, sustainability, and climate adaptation. And as Matt mentioned, I had the great opportunity to come back and do this work here, give back to Honolulu. So I'm extremely excited to be working on this project and to have the opportunity to meet all of you. So I'm gonna share my screen. There we go. All right, can everyone see that? Yeah, okay. I'm seeing nodding, great, okay.
And as we're getting into it too, there are some new faces and some other familiar faces within the resilience team here. You may recall Izzy Roberson, who serves on the team, the adaptation here. Today is actually her 1-year anniversary, I believe, for her AmeriCorps Vista term of service. We are super stoked that she has re-enrolled for a complete additional 12 months of service. And then Haley Campbell filled in, I believe, in August. Is that correct, Haley? Yeah. And you may recall previously the person serving in that role was Ujay Siddharth. So just wanted to keep everyone informed as the CCSR office grows and maintains our capacity to continue to engage with you. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, couldn't do it without our stellar team. I have here on the screen our standard virtual meeting guidelines. I'm sure you're all familiar, but just as a reminder, to please stay muted so that others have the opportunity to talk. We're always welcome at any point to provide nonverbal feedback using the thumbs up symbol or other emojis, or your literal thumbs up. Feel free to utilize the chat feature for any questions. As Matt said, if you have technical questions, you can direct them to Haley Cook, who is working in the background to make sure everything runs smoothly. We want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to speak, so please allow each other to speak. And we appreciate your patience if for some reason we should run into some technical issues, but hopefully it will be a smooth meeting. So our agenda is pretty full today, so appreciate you all for being here and for taking the time. We've already gotten through the first 2 items, so thank you all for accepting the meeting notes from meeting 3. And we will get into item 3, Climate Ready Oahu project updates. So as Matt mentioned, it has been a while since we last met. I think our last meeting was in January of 2021. And in that time, there have been, in addition to the staffing changes, there have been a fair number of updates on the project that we now would like to share with you all. So one of the things that we are going to be talking about in a lot more detail later today, but probably at the top of everyone's mind, is these adaptation strategies. So earlier in the process for Climate Ready Oahu, in the first few meetings, we used you all as a sounding board to suss out the important values and the vision for Climate Ready Oahu. We had the opportunity to talk with you about particular areas on the island geographies that we know are affected by some of these climate impacts, and zeroing in on the 5 specific impacts that we ended up focusing on. And then also had the opportunity to speak with you all about prioritizing and getting some insight into different adaptation approaches to some of those impacts. And so where we are right now is we've done a lot of internal in-house work to make sure that we have developed what we think is a pretty comprehensive look at what the city's role is so far. So what we have so far are adaptation strategies that are specific to these 5 hazards, but that are looking at specifically the services and operations for each of the city departments. So we met with city departments sort of on a department by department basis. We had 2 rounds of citywide interdepartmental meetings, one in February and another in September, and worked with them to help them think through what will these climate impacts look like in the context of your specific services and operations. So if you're managing infrastructure, what might hurricanes or rain bombs look like for your specific infrastructure, et cetera. And from that, we came up with this list of 60 strategies, which you all should have received and had the opportunity to start reviewing. In addition, moving down the list, for each department, we also wanted to help them advance the thinking on planning for climate resilience. And so we offered a couple of sort of deeper thought experiments and utilizing a planning approach called adaptation pathways, which kind of utilizes the framework of a subway map to say, well, if I need to get from here to the other side of town, and I know that station X might be flooded or out of service, what are the ways, looking at this map, that I can get around having to go through that station? How can I reroute, and how can I be adaptive in reaching the destination, reaching the goal that I want to reach? And so these adaptation pathways are a planning tool to help departments think through ways to reach certain objectives, so certain levels of service, for example, while remaining adaptive in the face of uncertainty with regard to the timing and extent of climate change. In addition, we've been looking pretty specifically with a focus on the capital improvement program as a really important place for potential integration with climate adaptation. Of course, as the city continues to design and build additional capital projects, we should be making sure that all of these projects are, one, taking into account climate change, and two, being designed as much as possible to be adaptive over time. As I mentioned, we've been having lots of rounds of meetings with the departments. We have also been talking with the public as well, with the community in maybe I want to say July. We had a round of community workshops where we presented a draft of our equity screen, which is meant to be an implementation tool for city planning managers to screen projects that they're implementing from this strategy, for example, to review them for key equity concerns as a high-level screen to identify quickly and early in the process what some of the crucial equity considerations might be for their projects, so that they can go and do the work to addressing those equity issues before the project gets too far along, that the inertia makes people have lots of pushback. We're also working on developing a climate equity index. It's building on top of the social vulnerability, or SOVI index, that is already on the Climate Ready Oahu website. We have also been developing a companion index to that SOVI index that is being called right now the Adaptive Capacity Index. And together, the social vulnerability and adaptive capacity sub-indices will together form a climate equity index. And so that's something that we're looking forward to rolling out soon. And the last 2 items on this list, I have the pleasure of working with a couple of members of the advisory hui itself, actually, Daniel Naho'opi'i and Pauline Sato. So for the climate adaptation polling, I'll turn it over to Daniel in just a second, but I wanted to pause because that was a lot of information, and we will talk a lot more about these strategies and the draft of Climate Ready Oahu next steps going forward, of course, later in the meeting. But for now, I want to pause and see if anybody has any questions. We'll look to see if any of the advisory committee members have questions first, and then open that up to the public as well after that. Yes, David Arakawa.
Yeah. Hi, Alex. Welcome. And hi, Matthew. Good to see you folks. I was looking at this list, these lists of projects. Do any of these projects, I was looking at the equity screen. I was kind of looking at the climate equity index. Do any of these initiatives address the impact, the cost on the community, or cost on taxpayers, or cost on residents, or cost on low-income communities that might be impacted by sea level rise, or impacted by flooding, or whatever it is? So do any of these initiatives address that? And if so, I'd like to volunteer. I'd like to be on whatever committee that is to help with that, because our members are concerned with the costs, and they pass the costs on to the consumer, or to the home buyer, or to the renter. So long question, but which ones address the costs, any additional costs on the residents?
Yeah, great question, Dave, and great to have the additional perspective. So as Alex presented, primarily the information that was attached to the agenda, that sort of laundry list at this point of potential strategies within different sectors, does have a bent and a focus on city departments, both our operations, our own assets, our infrastructure, and the services that we provide.
Right.
And if anything, the direct link to sort of like you said, cost to residents is, if we don't start to ensure that we're doing climate focused and leaning in towards the climate data, the costs are going to be that much greater in the future collectively for all of government,
Agreed.
for all of the community.
Agreed.
Yeah. So there's nothing right now that is alluding to, in this list, different rules, regulations, or obligations for development, if that is more specifically your question.
Development and protecting communities that are going to be impacted. So if you have to put in a flood mitigation project or some kind of a project like that, who pays? Right?
Everybody pays.
Right? And so
yeah.
And
it's
so
a public
right
works
now,
project.
I mean, they're working on stormwater, that stormwater thing, and it's dependent on how much coverage you have, asphalt. But I don't want to get into it, but anyway, I looked at this list and I couldn't see it. I can see ensure cost-effective maintenance efforts, but I'm going to have to ask you to identify the departments. Then we're going to have to go talk to every single department and ask every single department and we're going to ask the mayor, why do we have to do this? Ask every single department what the impact of this is going to be on residents, right? And even people who cannot afford it, right? Affordable housing people.
And Dave, some of the more specific stuff that you're looking for, when we get into the activity and the next agenda item. So right now, these are strategy, right? Then the next year, obviously, are more specifics on actions.
Yeah.
So that's where we can talk about some of these, because we're actually going to ask for everyone's volunteerism to look at and further review those levels so that you have a better opportunity to learn about what's being considered and then see how you might want to further engage in the discussion.
Right.
Because also collectively, we all know if we don't take action, we got costs ahead of us generally.
Right.
And a lot of the times the no action alternative, frankly, isn't an option for some of these.
No. It's not a no action. It's not a no action alternative. It's where can we get help to pay for it, or how we're going to spread the costs, right? It's not a,
those are on the implementation.
Please don't.
No, I'm not painting you, Dave. I'm sharing
no
the broader discussion for the whole of the group. And that's where the equity discussion comes in, because we know there's a whole array of things that should inform decision making and which actions to carry forward. So great question to set the stage.
So,
I'll just leave it with this
for that response. And
just one last
just
thing.
in the interest
Dave, what's
of time,
the specific question so that the others can participate
the one last
as well?
thing before Alex tries to cut me off is like the Congressional Budget Office, the impact on residents or the impact on citizens should be considered as a high level thing. So we're not talking at the end level after everything is done. You're talking about the end level. That's all. I just want to say it should be a high level thing to be one of the things that's considered.
Yeah, don't
upfront.
disagree with you at all on that, Dave.
Okay, thank you.
It's an important
Okay.
consideration and why we've been asking these equity discussions all
Yep.
along. Yep.
Thank you. This is a great discussion, and I do think, as Matt said, we will have some additional points in the agenda where some of these points might come back up. So I appreciate you all of your patience in allowing us to move along just in the interest of time. So I wanted to give Daniel Naho'opi'i, Community Advisory Hui member, the opportunity to talk a little bit about the climate adaptation polling that SMS has recently completed. So I'm going to stop sharing so that Daniel, you can share your screen. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. See my cover slide there?
All good, Daniel.
Okay, perfect. So yes, as Alex had mentioned, in preparation for screening out the various adaptation strategies, it was important to include how the residents and how the public, of course, were willing to their understanding of climate adaptation strategies, as well as their opinions in terms of support for particular ones, how it would impact them, and then how we could go about providing more information. If the office could provide more information to get residents up to speed or have a better understanding. So that's kind of the gist of why the polling was done. Let me kind of get this out of the way. To support the implementation of the Climate Ready Oahu, and then also a little background on the survey itself. So it was conducted between September 2nd and the 24th, both panel and telephone interview, mainly a web-based panel with Oahu residents only. And the survey consisted of about 22 subject matter questions and about 16 additional demographic questions. And as I mentioned, there are kind of three main sections. There's a set of questions regarding the current and future impacts of climate hazard risk. So where residents, their understanding of climate hazards and what's affecting them now. And then the second would be, they were given the list of various proposed climate adaptation actions, and they were asked to prioritize those so we could get a better understanding of which ones the residents would support or if they had any questions. And then the last thing was to collect additional data to help develop the communication and information planning phases going forward. As you can see, we balanced the sample and adjusted it for the various indicators if there was an imbalance to match the census data. And we finished up with 791 actual completed surveys, both in the primary urban core as well as the rest of Oahu, but left us a confidence interval of about plus or minus 3.5%. So the first thing we wanted to know, as I mentioned, was how does climate change impacts sit within their overall issues and concerns, right? And as you can see here, the green one is the climate change impacts. It's not top of mind. Top of mind right now for Hawaii residents, for Oahu residents, are housing costs, inadequate infrastructure, ineffective government, and of course the weak economy due to the pandemic issues. So what that shows is that these higher issues, things that are more priority or above them, will increase the challenge to address climate change issues as the office is working on communication strategies and working with the public on determining actions. So we also asked them, okay, of those climate actions that we know of, we've talked about them before, temperature, rainfall, tropical storm or hurricanes, coastal flooding, and drought. Which ones have they currently experienced? And one of the questions asked was also included, please give your experiences, some of the things that have affected you. And what we found were that most of the climate action impacts right now have to do with temperature and extreme heat. Now, which that also leads to other effects, or water falling down. The higher temperatures cause residents to feel uncomfortable, meaning they have increased stress. They felt that they couldn't accomplish their work. It also led to increase in their electrical bills to keep cool and such. So those are additional issues that come into play when talking about climate hazards. And here we also asked, what does climate hazards invoke in terms of their relation to other issues? And we found that climate hazards, everybody's thinking about the future. They may be not concerned with climate hazards right now, but they are very concerned that it's going to affect their future and the future of their kids and family. We also, and this goes back to that equity question, is that they are very conscious that the poorest communities are typically the most vulnerable to climate hazards. And they're very much agreed to that statement. And that works well with understanding why we have to work on these equity issues related to climate hazard actions. And so we also wanted to know their awareness of what is the city and county doing right now and where should they be doing. So in terms of awareness, barely half knew anything about the city doing any work for regarding climate action, climate hazards. And then if you look at the gray and the yellow, you can see that, yes, residents want the city to start preparing for these climate hazards that'll be upcoming. But if you look at it, the gray is much larger, meaning be cautious about and be moderate. It could be maybe because of cost, because of uncertainties in science, or not understanding how this impacts their overall taxes that they're paying, or the government. We talked about earlier about they felt that the government was not as efficient. So the city needs to approach it in the planning phase to get working on it, but be very cautious in terms of how it's gone about, and it's not wasted money, or you can't be too aggressive, I think, in terms of the development. So now we had the list, you had that list of various adaptation strategies. And out of the major hazards, we asked them first, what are your top priorities? What should the city be doing as a top priority? And we found number one is they felt that addressing the hurricane issues with major hurricanes and strengthening of homes, etc., should be their top priority. And this is based on if they were given a certain set amount of money and then allocated it. We also found that sea level rise is their second concern. But even though they felt that increased temperatures is what's impacting them right now, it falls actually down lower on the list of issues. And then here are some of this is the list of what they felt were the top actions that they could support. So each of these actions gathered at least 50% of the respondents. So we saw a major hurricane. They felt that the city should be investing in pre-disaster planning for post-disaster recovery. They could support updating building codes, and they could create a program to assist people in securing their roofs. For sea level rise and coastal erosion, it was more about rezoning to restrict development in the coastal areas and working with the state to actually relocate vulnerable properties in inland. There were more complex ways of dealing with this, and it seems like they didn't understand some of those concepts. For heavy rainfall and a flash flood, it's actually large scale type of infrastructure development, such as investing in retaining and restoring wetlands to manage rainfalls, and building out stream buffers and planning alongside streams that they were willing to support. In terms of increasing temperatures, there were many other types of ways, but they actually supported just building more trees and canopy covering in the new developments. They felt cost effectively that would be the best. And then for drought, they were willing to support creating a program for water saving improvements, and then also updating the plumbing code to require water saving devices. Now, you would say, okay, they can rank these, but there definitely would be trade-offs, you know, in terms of cost, or if improving one action actually affects another situation. So we asked them some trade-offs. And you can see, in general, residents are willing to support the actions, even if there were increased costs or negative economic impact. In other words, it's not just the dollar amounts that they were concerned about. They are very concerned of these issues and are, well, it's the city's money or being able to raise federal funds for it is very important. But also, you notice this blank area is the undecided, that light yellow area. That's 3 out of 10 residents. 30% are really undecided yet. So that means they still not sure if the extra cost, which would mean most likely increased taxes or fees, they're willing to pay that given for the outcomes that they're looking for in terms of improvements on hazards. So there's still 30% that are still very hesitant about that. So in the end, you know, what we found, this is just a highlights, because actually there's a lot more detail that we gave to the office to work on in terms of different communities and such. As I mentioned earlier, climate change is mixed among other issues of concern for residents, right? It was not out of the top 3, it was lower down, so it's in the middle. And to residents, climate change is about temperature rise, right? And not the other impacts. They still have not seen too many impacts. Maybe if they were on a neighbor island, they have more about hurricanes and such, but not here on Oahu. But the residents were willing to support the city and county on its implementation. And as we mentioned, also willing to support the various actions, even though it may impact them economically. The communications implementation strategy must break through, you know, all of this understanding of the benefits versus the costs, because as I mentioned, 30% are still kind of undecided. And we did look at differences in responses by geography, as well as differences in various segments of the population. And we found, in terms of geography, meaning different parts of the island, pretty much the same response. So those on the coastline or on the west or the west side did not have any different opinion as those in the urban Honolulu. What did differ are the more of the ethnic as well as some socioeconomic segments of the population. And so it's important to work with these communities with different messaging and explaining their concerns. And we can go into detail later on that. So that was just a quick overview. As I mentioned, there is a more detailed report that we presented to the office as well. They have all the background data that we can do further analyses.
Thanks, Daniel. And I think we were maybe remiss in explaining. So Daniel's participation on the advisory hui is in a very different capacity. He's actually representing as a member of the Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs. The ultimate procurement of SMS was through an open and competitive bid process. And it just is happenstance that Daniel is on both of those sides. So taking off hats, playing different roles, appreciate the additional support. And why we were motivated even to do this, quite frankly, is because we were unsatisfied with our engagement to date. and our ability to connect with people and to gather information. You may all recall that the whole of the project started during COVID, which is a very difficult time generally. Virtual community engagement, virtual advisory Hui meetings. There was a window, a brief gleaming window during the summer where we were out there doing direct community engagement at different events around the island before some of those were additionally shut down because of the surge and the health concern. So we have reassessed both our scope and our intentions that we had originally embarked on, as well as the resources that we maybe had available, and recognized we needed to gather more information. We needed to extend the process by which we were going to do the engagement and incorporate and utilize all the information, which translated both into this polling activity, which, as Daniel mentioned, we received recently. So we're still evaluating and assessing and carrying that information moving forward. But I'm using this also as a very long bridge for Alex to introduce the next guest that is helping us do more and do more better in terms of outreach and specific engagement.
Hey, Matt, can I ask one quick question of Daniel?
Go ahead, Mike.
So Daniel, on one of the early slides, the respondents listed infrastructure higher than they did climate. And I'm wondering if they had a different definition of infrastructure, if they would have conflated those things, which I think is actually true. So for example, if you live on the North Shore and you're dealing with Kamehameha Highway crumbling, well, that's basically an impact of sea level rise. So did were there any explanations given to respondents to sort of help them sort through those sorts of things?
Not on that list of issues, though on some of our previous studies we've done, community studies, infrastructure typically has mean, like you said, roads, also community schools, recreational types of infrastructure in their communities. So I could see, since climate does affect some of those, washed out roads, support like these heavy rains or something, but then impact not the infrastructure not being strong enough to support weather through those. Yeah, they are interrelated.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Mike, for that question. I want to introduce, as Matt said, another partner that we've been working with, who also happens to be a member of our community advisory Hui, Pauline Sato, from Malama Learning Center. Pauline is going to be partnering with us through an interesting arrangement where the city is not actually procuring service and is not actually putting any money into it, but we are rather serving sort of as a partner in advising on climate, serving as a subject matter expert in terms of climate change and climate impacts, as they help us lead some community involvement, community discussion, community work with organizations in parts of the island that we had not been reaching as much as we needed to in some of the earlier rounds of engagement. As Matt said, we sort of took a look at the engagement that we'd been able to do through COVID. And while we were able to reach a lot of people, there were certain parts of the island that were underrepresented. And so this was sort of an opportunity for us to specifically focus on these communities that we had had a harder time reaching. So Pauline, would you like to make a few comments?
Sure. Thank you, Alex and Matt and everyone. Daniel, your presentation was amazing. I would love to learn more about it because I think it will help the project that we're working on. So just real quickly, and I have no slides, so hopefully this will be very quick. What we've been asked to help with is to engage community members, and we're not talking about hundreds of people, but more in kind of more intimate types of discussions with communities, families, especially on the west side of the island and North Shore areas, and to come up with ways to engage communities in in ways that are maybe not typical. Some typical ways in the past might have been, through evening community meetings or outreach tents, or, something that gets a lot of people. But with COVID, of course, that kind of, nixes that whole idea. But I think what we want to try to do is work with community organizations that already work with families and communities in those areas, and try to dovetail this engagement process with these community groups that have contact, and somehow make it work. And we're not talking about in-depth, maybe a half-day thing that also encourages some, hands to the earth type of activities, so that people are wanting to come. They're not coming, to hear a lecture per se. They're coming to learn, but also to discuss and share their thoughts and ideas and wishes, and just develop a stronger network within their own community, but also with the city. Because I think this could be leading to longer term relationships that go beyond this particular project. So we're just getting started. I mean, literally just a couple of weeks ago. We don't have any firm dates yet or locations, but we're reaching out to some groups that we have had the pleasure of working with for the past almost 20 years. And, as you know, a lot of outreach is dependent on relationships. So it's our relationships with the organizations and the organizations' relationships with the communities. And that's what we're going to build upon. And we're through the funding provided by, I can't even remember, Alex, who the actual funding comes from. It's some kind of big
Capua Consulting.
But they're getting it from another.
Bloomberg Philanthropy.
Oh, Bloomberg, yeah. So, right. Yeah. So they're helping cities all across the country. So, and the whole point is for diversity, so part of the funding will help us, compensate people for their time to spend with us, to host these meetings, so that, people aren't just always giving of their time and their mana'o, but it's a real, reciprocal kind of relationship. So I know that's vague, but we should have more detail coming up, because this is going to happen within the next 6 months. And that's the timeline given to us. And so we'll hopefully be able to reach, maybe 100, 150 people in very direct ways, and get some very good feedback and ideas, and more so the relationships to continue. And especially as other funding opportunities come that could actually help communities, we want to put those organizations, give them notice that, hey, be aware these things can come to fruition if you're ready for it. So that's about it from my end. But if anybody would like to ask questions, you can email me. I'll put my email in the chat, or just let me know, and I'd love to learn from any of you who have experience in this, and make this the project go as far as possible.
Great, thanks so much, Pauline. Yeah, as Pauline mentioned, we are very much in the early stages. Just had our kickoff meeting and are still currently reaching out to potential partners in these communities through Pauline and her organization's relationships. But the community events will likely be happening in the February through April range. And through that community engagement, we hope to accomplish a couple things. One is, of course, increasing education and awareness about climate change, climate impacts, the data that we have, and the things that the city is considering doing and this project, but also to have a two-way conversation about impacts and changes and adaptation that is already happening in a lot of these communities. A lot of insight is is already out in the community, and we want to make sure that we have the opportunity to hear directly from people who have that insight. And then thirdly, as Pauline mentioned, we want to start to foster these relationships so that we can hopefully start to identify and develop long-term partners in implementing true climate adaptation, because as we know, the city cannot and probably should not be doing all of the climate adaptation work. We certainly want to lead where we can, which we think is in directing and facilitating these conversations, bringing resources to bear to bring information to people. But we know and look forward to the opportunity that the city might have community partners and community champions out there who can help to lead this work as well. So I see Pauline has put her email in the chat. With that, I will share again. All right. Everyone seeing the screen? Okay, great. So now we want to talk a little more about the report itself, the Climate Ready Oahu report itself, the strategy. Right now, how we've been looking at Climate Ready Oahu has been primarily through two lenses. The first, and the one that we've last left off speaking with you all through, was through the lens of climate hazards. So we have our 5 climate hazards, and we've been looking at impacts and particular potential adaptation strategies for each of those impacts. The next sort of way that we've cut through them, as I mentioned earlier, has been looking at department by department services and operations and infrastructure. The next stages that we're looking at is sort of going to be a little more synthesis. We want to move from these department strategies to really bring it back to more topical and understandable and approachable sectors or buckets, categories of actions, so that I think these are more understandable from an action and community perspective. And then, of course, we also have additional equity and community input that we're still collecting that will also need to be added into the report. So this flow chart sort of provides a quick overview of where we are. So as I mentioned, we've sort of come through these looking at city services, and right now what we sent out to you all earlier was the strategies that had been identified through the city department work, and a first draft at coming up with these 6 sectors. So the steps that we have right now are to finalize the sectors, and then we're also going to tee you up today through our activity to help us identify potential partners and potential community and individual scale actions. So, the premise of the Community Advisory Hui, the commitment that we had put out to all of you that you all have been so generous to respond with, is that we would bring you in at key decision points along the way. So what is the key decision point that we're at now that we're asking for your feedback on? We are trying to finalize the ultimate structure of the report. So what we have now is a lot of information, and they're organized in ways that are very, that make sense to the city, but probably don't make as much sense to the general public. And we want to make sure that the final report is reflective of both the vision for the document overall, and also is presented in a way that is logical and holistic and makes sense. So that's why we're asking for feedback about the sectors today. Please keep in mind that you know, the strategies that are already in this list are just the first building point. And from there, we completely intend and will add in additional strategies that cover more of the community and individual scale actions. So with that, want to sort of bring it back to where we had started out with all of you. So in the first few meetings, we talked about values and visioning, and this is the vision statement that, based on feedback from you, from the public, from our sister agencies, we came back with, and that we've sort of think summarizes the overall vision for Climate Ready Oahu. And we're showing this to you again today because we want to make sure that as we're thinking about the final structure, these sectors, any potential additional strategies, that we're always coming back to this vision. You know, there's been a lot of process over the past year that has been pretty in the weeds. And so this is our opportunity, I think, an important opportunity to step back and make sure, hey, did we have any mission drift? And if so, let's make sure that we're writing our direction and make sure that we're going forward in a way that's consistent with the vision that we had laid out. So the sectors as we presented them in the appendix.
Alex,
that was
there's a
attached.
question.
Oh, yes, David.
You're muted, Dave.
Just consider adding equity somewhere in that, or the impact of on the I know you have communities in there, but impacts to community and data-driven strategy. But if you could factor, if it works, if it doesn't work, that's okay. But if it works, please consider equity. Some of the hardest hit areas are not the richest areas. So that's it. That's all.
Yeah, it's, I'm a little embarrassed that we presented it without that explicit inclusion, as that's been so many of the activities from the past couple of meetings, but that's why we have this group. So thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Sorry. You know, that's a great point, that if you have any feedback on, of course, the sectors and strategies that we're asking about today, but also this vision statement, please do not hesitate to reach out and provide that. We are more than happy to receive and probably will say, of course, we should have thought of that ourselves. So, yeah, so the spreadsheet that had been sent around and that was attached to the agenda was these 60 strategies that were grouped into sort of 6 sectors. And so these sectors were developed by looking at a wide sample, a very large sample of adaptation strategies and resilience strategies from cities across the country and some outside of the country, and looking at the things that they considered in their strategies. And so we made this very long list of all of the things, of the entire universe, essentially, of climate adaptation considerations. And we boiled them down into what we think are the 6 sectors. So this is meant to capture sort of the universe of climate adaptation, such that as we continue to talk about adaptation strategies, they should theoretically have a home in one of these 6 sectors. However, one of the goals that we have for the sectors is that they will make for an easier entry point in the document for community. And so if these sectors aren't making sense, some of the terminology or some of the ways that they're grouped aren't making sense, those are the types of feedback that I think would be helpful to make sure that we get them right. But the sectors are buildings, connected and prepared communities, health and food security, governance, which includes things like planning and funding, utilities, mobility and transportation, and lastly, the natural environment. So we want to allow you all to have the opportunity to start discussing some of these sectors and some of these strategies. We are going to put you out into breakout rooms. There will be 4 breakout rooms. Each room will have a facilitator, and we will be using a Jamboard. So I don't know if you all are familiar with Jamboards, but on the Jamboard will be these questions. So you don't need to write them down now, but we are going to be asking, there are going to be 2 sorts of activities once we go into our breakout rooms. The first is going to be looking at these sectors, thinking about the strategies that are in these sectors. Do they make sense? Are they unclear? Is anything missing? And then also starting to think about whether you or organizations that you're aware of are already starting to work along these sectors. And then the second activity is going to be actually taking a look at a little more detail. So we have these 60 strategies, and under all of the strategies is more specific implementing action. So a strategy might have 2 or 3 actions underneath it that tell you how that strategy will be accomplished. As Matt mentioned earlier, you all will have the opportunity to take a look at that level of detail, but because we want to we need to get through we would need to get through a lot of content in a short amount of time today. We're focusing mostly on the strategies, but this second activity, we do want to go through an example of some of these strategies and show you some of the implementing actions that come with one of these strategies, and go through some of the conversations and types of feedback that we're hoping you all will have the opportunity to provide when you have the chance to look more closely at the actions following this meeting, which we will send out. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and we will move out into breakout rooms.
Yeah, I'm about to launch people into breakout rooms. You should get automatically sucked in. Encourage you to, as I'm setting you up here, take a breath, stretch your arms. This is the fun part. Get those brain juices flowing. Encourage you to keep your video on as well to participate if you can. But we'll have about 20 minutes. I'll let people know when we're at about halfway, and then I'll bring you back to the main session. If you have any troubles, there should be a return to main room button so you can come back and visit me in the main room if you need to. But with that, I'll see you all in a bit. Welcome back, everybody. I had the pleasure of having the bird's eye view of the jam boards. Y'all were really jamming. I think Alex E, though, your group wins for most sticky notes.
Oh.
I didn't read
Do
what they
it.
said. They might all say Alex E is the best 15 times. I'm not sure.
Alex is the
Probably-
man. Alex is the man.
Probably have a lot because I was writing a lot of them on behalf of other people, but all right. So I think everyone should be filtering back in. It's nice to see everyone's face coming back in from the meetings. I wonder if we might take just a few minutes, maybe until 5:45. If anybody had any thing that they wanted to share, discussion or key insights or conversations, topics that you all were discussing in your breakout rooms that you wanted to share with the group, wanted to leave space for that right now.
Alex, are you asking the facilitator's voice or are you asking for the participant's voice?
I'd love to hear from participants. I hear from these facilitators all day.
Okay, I'd like to share one of the things that was brought up in our group that wasn't really identified, but hopefully the larger group can hear. And it was in regards to iwi kupuna. And it was in, where do they, which one of the sectors would they fit into, understanding that our iwi are in places unknown and that they still require our protection. And, knowing that we're dealing with erosion in various spaces, and there's some governance in it, there's some natural environment, there's some education, there's a lot of different things that it fits into. But at the forefront, it is important for us to recognize that our development and our strategies must also include those that, are still laying at rest. And so we have to be conscious of that. Mahalo.
Mahalo. Does anyone else have anything they want to share?
Pauline, why don't you share your insight, Pauline?
Thank you, David. Actually, I want to share Dyson's insight because I'm glad he had a minute to talk. He's, a youth representative and was really sharing. He's thinking a lot. So Dyson, can you just share a couple, of your thoughts that you think we should hear?
Thanks, Pauline. I appreciate you making space for youth voice here. Basically, there's a lot of really good discussion, and after this, I'd like to give the mic back to Pauline for her to share her own idea. But for myself, I was looking at the strategies and sectors, and I realized that there's not a lot of emphasis on youth, despite the fact that we get to inherit both the benefits and the costs that are incurred with this planet. So I was thinking it would be really nice to have something outlined very specifically that promotes, or at least looks as a strategy, promoting youth empowerment. And I say empowerment, not engagement, because we have lots of engagement, but you don't see a lot of times youth in positions of power that's officialized by the government. And I felt like that's important if we're going to move on from this issue. And actually, I also see Bronson here, who is a fellow youth as well. I believe you're on the Youth Commission, Bronson. And so, I believe that building things like that to get youth involved and then going another step further, giving them power to vote in various situations, like we see with the DOE, where you have a student representative who has no power on the actual board. These things that really could do some changing. And I'm, super excited to see that we have conversations going around about that. But I'll give the mic back over to Pauline.
Okay, I don't know. I think we don't have time, Alex, but my thing, okay, just real quickly, I was commiserating with Chip Fletcher because we're like, oh my God, it's so horrible, and the cost and everything. How do we decide which to focus on and that? And it's just, oh my God, we're in a pickle here. But I think what I was suggesting is, if we could say, what would be a healthy community? What could it look like? it's kind of late in the game in certain areas, but we're also developing communities in new places. So how could we make it so that we are climate ready? We are not going to suffer, severe catastrophic things because we have planned better. And if we have that in mind, then we can say, okay, where are we from that ideal vision? And knowing that that ideal vision is going to change over time too. So it's more like having the sail plan, like where's your destination? How, what does it look like? Vision it in your head so that when you make the sail, you know what you're looking for. So that's basically it.
Thanks, Pauline, and thank you, Dyson. Great thoughts. Now you see why we had so many Post-it notes in our group. So many super good thinkers in our group. So we are looking forward to looking through all of these Jamboards in more detail. We'll make the slides and that we can make the Jamboards available that will be posted on our website following this meeting, in addition to a recording of the main room from this meeting as well. So with that, we will move on. We're almost done though, almost, Paul. So the next item on the agenda was public input for matters that are not on the agenda. Does anyone have any items that they wish to agendize through this item? Okay.
I don't have any item for the agenda. Just a quick question. I was going to ask it in the breakout room, but then kind of ran out of time. But I just seen in the Connected and Prepared Communities, the Use Cultural Resource Adaptation Plan. Is that a plan that you guys have already or just developing? Just let me know.
I will have to check on that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we'll have to see specifically which department that informed us about that one, Bronson.
But most likely, the strategies that were sorted into all of those sectors were the result of conversations with interviews with departments. So the odds are that if that's referenced, that someone in a department had something in mind that they were thinking about. So we can track that down and get back to you. Thanks.
I think it's actually in reference to something that the National Park Service has put out in terms of guidance and support for those that have jurisdiction and purview over things that fall under sort of cultural resource management. We'll get back.
Okay. Thanks. Were there any other items not agendized? Okay. Seeing none, hearing none, we'll move to our next agenda item, which is talking about a next tentative meeting date. So this is advisory Hui meeting number 4 out of 5. We had originally asked you all to sign on to meeting with us 5 times. At our last meeting, it's our hope to be able to provide you with a draft of Climate Ready Oahu that is reflective of these next steps that we're taking to add in community, individual scale actions in addition to potential partnerships. That will be as a near final draft that will also be ready for broader public comment. We're thinking that because this next stage of public engagement that we're doing, in particular with Pauline and Malama Learning Center, will last us through the spring, that a timing for that meeting will likely be around May 2022, early summer 2022. So that's sort of what we're thinking right now. I know that is a while from now, and it has been a while since we last spoke with you. So we want to remind you that as we continue to have public engagement, which we will continue to do, those are always open you're always welcome to continue to engage, and we will reach out to you specifically following this meeting with more specific channel for providing feedback as well. On this slide, I also have outlined a couple of the next steps between now and adoption. So we are currently coming up on the end of our contract with our ICF consultants who have been helping us prepare the draft of city strategies. We are going to embark on our community engagement partnership with Malama Learning Center. We need to incorporate the findings from that community engagement, including individual community scale actions and partnerships, send it out for public comment, and then bring it to council for adoption. So with that, I want to give a quick call to this next steps that we have for all of you. So we're going to post in the chat right now a Google form. And this Google form will basically just ask you one question, which is, which of these 6 sectors, you can pick more than one, are you interested in and want to see more detail about? So if you recall, when we were in the breakout rooms, in the second activity, we looked at an example strategy and some of the example implementing actions that fall within that strategy. So all 60 of those actions on the document that was sent out with the agenda have implementing actions that fall under them. So there's an additional level of detail beyond what you have already seen. And so I know a lot of you have already reached out saying, hey, we would love to see additional detail beyond this. So we want to make that available to you all. We also want to allow you to choose which ones you're interested in based on sector, because maybe you're mostly primarily interested in things relating to your own sector, but you can choose all 6 if you'd like. But in this Google form, we'll just ask you to select which sectors you're interested in receiving this additional detail about. And then we're going to ask that if you have feedback on those strategies and actions, that you send them back to us, in particular, responding to the 4 questions that we started talking about in that second activity. So let's see. I see that the form has gone out in the chat. We will also send a link to this form out by email for you all and for the people who were not able to attend today. And yeah, okay, so does anyone have any final questions on these next steps on our tentative next meeting date?
I do, and I asked for forgiveness because I came an hour late into this meeting, so it may have been covered before I arrived. But can you quickly describe the Malama Learning Center engagement for me?
Sure. So Pauline, do you want to? I saw you come off mute.
Well, Karen, I can talk.
I could bug her
you want me to
offline
just-
too, but I was
Yeah,
just
why
kidding.
don't I just talk to you offline, because everybody else kind of heard it. So,
That would be great.
okay, I'll do that. Thanks.
Mahalo.
The short of the short is we're asking for help to help us connect with more people.
Well, I might be able to help with Pauline on that too.
Good. That's awesome. Okay, well, thank you all for taking time at the end of your day to talk with us. I hope you're all staying safe and dry out there, that you all have a wonderful holiday season. We will talk with you soon, and we'll look forward to sending out some of these follow-up items. But thank you so much, and this concludes the meeting. Aloha.
Great job, Alex. Mahalo, everybody.
Thank
Mahalo.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Alex.